Before we start, if you're finding value in these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Also, a note. This story involves Navajo cultural elements. While based on real traditions, I've consulted with cultural advisors to ensure respectful representation. Now, let's begin. My name is Thomas Begay, and I'm a police officer with the Southern Ute Tribal Police Department in southwestern Colorado. What I'm about to tell you happened in the fall of 2001, and it changed everything I thought I knew about the land I've protected for 15 years. I'm Diné, Navajo, though I grew up on Ute land after my mother married a Ute man when I was 7. My grandfather was a medicine man, one of the last who knew the old ceremonies. He died when I was 16, but before he passed, he taught me things. Not the sacred knowledge that stays with the medicine people, but enough to understand that the world is bigger than what we can see with our eyes. He told me about bone magic, how in the old days certain people, the ones who walked the dark path, could use bones to predict, to curse, to kill from a distance. He said the bones remember. They hold echoes of the life that once moved through them, and in the right hands, or the wrong hands, they could speak. I didn't believe him, not really. I was a teenager who wanted to be a cop, who believed in evidence and procedure. The supernatural was for the elders, for the stories told around winter fires. My world was traffic stops and domestic disputes, broken fences and stolen livestock. Until September 17th, 2001. I was on patrol near the southern boundary of the reservation, where our land meets the New Mexico border. It's rough country out there, high desert with mesas rising like ancient monuments, juniper and pinyon scattered across red earth. You can drive for an hour and not see another human being. I was checking on a report of illegal camping, tourists who'd set up on tribal land without permission. As I drove down a dirt road that barely qualified as a trail, I saw it. In the middle of the road, arranged in a perfect circle about 10 feet in diameter, were bones. I stopped my truck and got out, hand instinctively moving to my radio. But this wasn't the kind of situation you called in immediately. First, I needed to understand what I was looking at. They were animal bones mostly. I could identify deer, elk, maybe coyote. They'd been cleaned, bleached white by sun and time. But the arrangement wasn't natural. Someone had placed them deliberately, creating a pattern. The circle was divided into 4 quadrants, like a medicine wheel. In each quadrant, the bones spelled out shapes. In the north, they formed what looked like a bird. In the east, a snake. In the south, a 4-legged animal, maybe a dog or wolf. In the west, a human figure. And in the center of the circle, standing upright, planted in the dirt like a grave marker, was a cow's skull. Its eye sockets faced east toward the rising sun. I'd grown up around ranches. I knew animal bones. What bothered me wasn't the bones themselves, it was the precision, the care. Someone had spent hours creating this, out here in the middle of nowhere, on a road that saw maybe 1 vehicle a day. I took photos with my digital camera, documented everything, then carefully disturbed the pattern, kicking the bones aside so no one else would see it. Later, I'd wonder if that was my first mistake, if by destroying the circle, I'd somehow activated something. But in the moment, I just wanted it gone. I never found the illegal campers, spent 2 hours searching the area, but if they'd been there, they were gone now. When I got back to the station, I showed the photos to my partner, Officer Ray Whitehorse. He was Ute, 3rd-generation law enforcement, a practical man who'd seen everything in 30 years on the job. He stared at the photos for a long time. "Where did you find this?" he finally asked. South Boundary Road, about 6 miles in from the highway, right in the middle of the dirt track. "And you kicked it apart?" Yeah, didn't want tourists stumbling across it, getting ideas about native mysticism or whatever. Ray was quiet, which wasn't like him. Usually he had an opinion about everything. "What is it?" I asked. "Some kind of ritual thing?" "It's a prediction," he said finally. "Old style. Haven't seen one of these in 40 years, not since I was a kid, and the elders still practice the old ways." "Prediction of what?" He pointed to the human figure in the west quadrant. "Death. Someone's going to die. The west is the direction of endings, of the sun setting. When you arrange bones like this, pointing west, you're marking someone for death." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "That's just superstition, Ray." "Maybe. But my grandfather told me about these. He said bone patterns were used by skinwalkers, by Navajo witches who'd turned away from the good path. They'd create patterns to curse their enemies, to predict deaths, to control events." He looked up at me. "Thomas, this was made by someone who knows the old ways, someone who believes in this." "So what? We're investigating witchcraft now." "We're investigating whoever made this. Because, belief or not, someone spent a lot of time creating a death prediction on tribal land. That alone is illegal, harassment at minimum, and if someone does die..." He trailed off. "Then it's just coincidence," I finished. Ray nodded, but he didn't look convinced. 2 days later, on September 19th, we got the call. A body had been found near the south boundary, about 3 miles from where I discovered the bone pattern. The victim was a 47-year-old man named Dale Morrison, a white guy from Durango who'd been hiking on tribal land. "Heart attack," the medical examiner said. "Natural causes. He'd been in poor health, overweight, high blood pressure. The heat and exertion had been too much for him. A tragedy, but not suspicious. Except for one thing. The body was found lying in the west direction. His feet pointed east, his head pointed west, exactly like the human figure in the bone pattern. When I got to the scene and saw the position of the body, I felt my skin prickle. Ray saw it too. We didn't say anything to the other officers, but later, back at the station, we pulled out my photos and compared them. The position matched. Not approximately, exactly." "Coincidence," I said, trying to convince myself. "Maybe," Ray replied. "But Thomas, in the old stories, the patterns don't just predict death. They cause it. They reach out across distance and pull the life out of someone. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents that aren't really accidents. The bones call and the living answer. That's not possible. Then explain how a pattern created 2 days ago matches the exact position of a body found 3 miles away." I couldn't. Not with logic. Not with reason. 3 days later, I found another pattern. This time it was on the north boundary of the reservation, near the base of Sleeping Ute Mountain. I'd been checking on a report of vandalism at one of our cultural sites when I saw it. Another circle. Same size, same structure. 4 quadrants, bones arranged in shapes. But this time the center marker wasn't a cow skull, it was a human skull. Not ancient, not archaeological. This was recent, maybe a year old, still with remnants of soft tissue in the crevices. I called it in immediately. This was beyond my ability to handle alone. Within an hour, we had the FBI on site. They'd been working several cases on tribal lands in the region, and a human skull fell under federal jurisdiction. Special Agent Elia Vogel was in her 30s, efficient and no nonsense. She documented everything, took samples, began the process of identifying the skull. "Any idea who might be doing this?" she asked me. "No, but this is the second pattern I've found in a week." I showed her photos of the first one. She studied them carefully. "And someone died 2 days after you found this first pattern?" natural causes, heart attack, but positioned exactly as shown in the pattern. Yes, she looked up at me. Officer Begay, I need you to understand something. I work dozens of cases on tribal lands. I've seen things that don't make it into official reports because they can't be explained. I've learned to respect that there are elements of native culture that operate outside mainstream understanding. So, when I ask you this question, I'm asking seriously. Do you think these patterns are causing deaths or predicting them? It was the first time anyone in law enforcement had asked me that directly, without mockery or dismissal. I don't know, I admitted. My grandfather believed in bone magic. But I'm a cop. I believe in evidence. Sometimes evidence points to things we don't want to believe. She gestured at the pattern. This is evidence. Someone is creating these. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And if deaths follow these patterns, whether caused or predicted, we need to stop it. The skull was identified 3 days later. It belonged to Maria Santos, a 32-year-old woman from Farmington who'd disappeared 6 months earlier while hiking near Mesa Verde. Her death was now being investigated as a homicide. And on September 25th, exactly 48 hours after we found the second pattern, another body turned up. This time, it was a woman named Jennifer Yazzie, Navajo, 34 years old. She'd been driving on reservation roads when her car went off a cliff. Single vehicle accident, no other cars involved. She died instantly when her vehicle rolled 3 times and landed in a ravine. But here's what made my blood run cold. She'd been thrown from the vehicle during the roll. And when we found her body, it was positioned exactly as shown in the second bone pattern. Face down, arms spread, legs together. Exactly. Ray and I stood at the crash site, looking at the trajectory, the marks in the dirt. There was no way the accident could have positioned her body that precisely. Someone had moved her after she died, arranged her to match the pattern, or the pattern had arranged her. Thomas, Ray said quietly, we need to find who's making these before they make another one. How? We've got no witnesses, no physical evidence except the bones themselves. The first site was completely clean, no footprints, nothing. Then we wait, and we watch, because whoever's doing this is following a schedule. 3 days between patterns, 2 days from pattern to death. That's a rhythm, a ritual rhythm. He was right. And 3 days later, on September 28th, I found the third pattern. This time, I didn't stumble across it by accident. I'd been thinking about the locations, looking at a map. The first pattern was south boundary, the second was north. If someone was following a directional sequence, the next would be either east or west. I drove to the east boundary at dawn and searched for 3 hours before I found it. Hidden in a small canyon, away from any trail, was the largest pattern yet. This one wasn't a circle. It was a spiral, bones arranged in a spiral pattern, that led from the outside edge to the center, where another human skull rested. But there was something else, something that made my hand shake as I took photos. Carved into the skull, etched into the forehead bone, was a name. My name. Thomas Begay. I dropped my camera. Actually dropped it, my hands suddenly numb. This wasn't random. This wasn't just someone making death predictions. This was personal. Someone was targeting me. I called Ray immediately. He arrived within 30 minutes, along with Agent Vogel and 2 other FBI officers. This changes everything, Vogel said, studying the skull. This is a direct threat. We need to get you into protective custody. I'm not leaving the reservation, I said. This is my jurisdiction. My land. Your land has someone on it who's predicting deaths with 99% accuracy and who's now predicted yours. You need protection. Then give me protection. But I'm not running. Ray stepped closer. Thomas, look at the pattern. Look at the center. I did. The skull with my name was surrounded by bones arranged in a specific shape. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was a date, written in bones. October 1st, 3 days from now. They're giving you a deadline, Ray said. 3 days to what? To figure out who's doing this? To stop them? Or 3 days until I die like the others, I finished. Agent Vogel was already on her phone, calling for more resources. But I wasn't listening. I was staring at that skull, at my name carved into bone, at the date that marked my death. 48 hours. In 48 hours, if the pattern held, someone would die. And this time, according to the bones, it would be me. I thought about my grandfather, about his warnings about bone magic, about how the bones remember, about how they speak to those who know how to listen. And I realized that maybe I needed to start listening. Not just as a cop looking for evidence, but as a Diné, a Navajo, whose grandfather had tried to teach him that the world was bigger than what we could see. Because someone was speaking in bones, and they were speaking about death. My death. And I had 3 days to figure out who they were and how to stop them. Or the bones would call, and I would answer. 3 days. 72 hours to figure out who was creating bone patterns that predicted death with impossible accuracy, and who had now marked me as their next victim. Agent Vogel set up a command center at the tribal police station. Within 6 hours, we had 3 more FBI agents, a forensic anthropologist, and a cultural consultant from the Navajo Nation. The consultant was an elderly man named Henry Nez, a medicine man who'd worked with law enforcement before on cases involving traditional practices. He studied my photographs for a long time, his weathered face grave. "This is very old knowledge," he finally said. "Very dangerous. Whoever is doing this was taught by someone who knew the dark path. The Navajo way speaks of balance, of walking in beauty. But there are those who choose to walk in darkness, who use their knowledge to harm rather than heal." "Can you tell us anything about who might have this knowledge?" Vogel asked. Henry gestured at the photos. "The patterns are traditional, yes. But they're also wrong, mixed. Some of these symbols are Diné, some are Ute, some are even Hopi. This person knows pieces of many traditions but doesn't fully understand any of them. They're powerful enough to create working patterns but clumsy. A true medicine person would never mix traditions like this." "Working patterns?" I asked. "You're saying these actually work? That they actually cause the deaths?" Henry looked at me directly. "Your grandfather was Walter Begay, wasn't he? He was known among the people. He would have taught you that belief creates reality. If someone believes strongly enough that bones can speak, predict, command, then bones can do those things. The question isn't whether the magic is real. The question is whether the practitioner believes it's real. So, we're dealing with someone who believes they have magical powers," Vogel said. "That narrows it down to 0 suspects, because how do we identify belief?" "You look for signs," Henry replied. "Someone doing this would be isolated, spending time alone in remote areas. They'd need access to bones, both animal and human. They'd need knowledge of traditional practices, which means they either learned from family or studied extensively. And they'd be angry. This kind of dark work comes from anger, from a need for revenge or power." Ray had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up. "The human skulls. Both victims were found 6 months before they showed up in patterns. Maria Santos and the one in Thomas's pattern haven't been identified yet. If we can figure out where the killer is getting these skulls, we might find them." It was a good lead. Vogel assigned 2 agents to track down missing persons reports, grave robberies, anything that might explain how someone was acquiring human skulls in the Four Corners region. Meanwhile, I had 48 hours to live, according to the pattern. I wasn't going to spend them sitting in the station. I need to go back out there, I told Ray, to where the patterns were found. There has to be something we missed. Not alone, he said. If someone's targeting you specifically, they might be waiting for you to do exactly that. Then come with me. But I can't just wait here for October 1st. I need to do something. We drove out to the first site, the south boundary where I'd found the initial pattern. Agent Vogel came with us, along with Henry Nez. I wanted his perspective on the locations, whether the sites themselves had significance. As we walked the area, Henry pointed out features I'd never noticed. Small cairns of stones, barely visible. Pieces of turquoise tucked into juniper branches. Signs that this area had been used for ceremonies before, though not recently. This is a power place, Henry said, where the land speaks more clearly. All 3 sites you've found, they're all power places. Whoever is doing this knows the land well. They know where to work. Could they be watching us right now? I asked, scanning the mesa tops. Possible, but more likely they're preparing. October 1st is significant. It's when the seasons begin to turn, when summer dies and winter is born. A time of transition, of endings and beginnings. A good time for death magic. We searched for another 3 hours, but found nothing new. As the sun started to set, painting the mesas in shades of red and gold, we headed back to the truck. That's when I saw it. On my windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a small bundle of sage tied with red thread. Attached to it was a note written on what looked like birch bark. The note said, "The bones have spoken. The west wind carries your name. 2 paths remain. Find me before sunset October 1st, or join the others in the pattern." "Don't touch it," Vogel said, pulling out evidence gloves. She carefully collected the bundle and note, sealing them in evidence bags. Henry examined them without touching. "The sage is for purification. The red thread is for binding. This is a challenge, Officer Begay. This person is telling you they want to be found. They're testing you. Testing me for what? To see if you're worthy. If you understand the old ways well enough to find them. This isn't just about killing you, it's about proving something." Back at the station, Vogel's team processed the evidence. No fingerprints on the note or bundle. The sage was common, could be purchased anywhere. The birch bark was more unusual, not native to this region. It suggested someone who'd traveled, who had access to materials from different areas. The handwriting was analyzed, old-fashioned, careful, almost ceremonial in its precision, the kind of handwriting taught in schools 50 years ago. "We're looking for someone older," Vogel concluded. "Probably 60 plus. Someone who learned traditional handwriting, traditional practices. Someone who's been doing this for a long time." I thought about that. About someone who'd spent decades learning bone magic, perfecting it, waiting for the right moment to use it. And now, for some reason, they'd chosen to target me. "Why me?" I asked Henry. "I'm not important. I'm just a tribal cop." "You're Walter Begay's grandson," Henry replied. "Your grandfather was powerful, respected. He walked the good path and taught many people. If someone wanted to challenge that legacy, to prove their power over his, they might target his grandson." It made a twisted kind of sense. My grandfather had died 15 years ago, but his reputation remained strong among the Diné people. If someone from the dark path wanted to make a statement, killing his grandson would be symbolic. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the patterns, about the 3 victims who'd died exactly as predicted, about the skull with my name carved into it. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying and went to my grandfather's old house. My mother had kept it exactly as he'd left it, a small adobe structure on the edge of the reservation. His books, his tools, his ceremonial items were all still there, preserved like a museum. I'd avoided the place for years. Too many memories. Too much grief. But tonight, I needed guidance only he could give, even if it had to come from the things he'd left behind. I found his journals in a wooden chest, dozens of notebooks filled with his careful handwriting. Observations about ceremonies, about healing, about the balance between light and dark. I'd never read them before, but now I searched desperately for anything about bone magic. It was in the 3rd journal that I found it, an entry from 1972 describing a case my grandfather had consulted on, a series of deaths on the Navajo reservation in Arizona, all predicted by bone patterns. The practitioner had been a woman named Adeline So, someone my grandfather had known in his youth. Adeline chose the dark path after her family was killed in a car accident, he'd written. She blamed the white doctors who couldn't save them, blamed the modern world that had taken her children from the old ways. She learned bone magic from a witch in New Mexico, spent 20 years perfecting it. By the time we found her, she'd killed 17 people using patterns. 17 people, just like the victims I'd found research on. Was there a connection? I kept reading. My grandfather described how they'd caught Adeline, how she'd confessed to creating the patterns, how she'd believed the bones gave her power over life and death. She'd been institutionalized, deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial. The entry ended with a chilling note. Adeline had a daughter, Irene, who witnessed many of the ceremonies. The daughter was removed by social services, but she'd already learned too much. I worry about what knowledge she carries, what she might do with it someday. I pulled out my phone and called Vogel, despite the early hour. I think I know who's doing this, or at least, who might have taught them. I explained what I'd found. Vogelsee was quiet for a moment. Thomas, Adeline So died in 1985. But if she had a daughter who learned from her, who witnessed the bone magic, we need to find Irene So. Within an hour, Vogel's team had tracked down records. Irene So, born 1965, removed from her mother's custody at age 7. Placed in foster care in New Mexico, then Colorado. Multiple placements, behavioral problems, ran away at 16. No records after 1981. She'd disappeared into the system, into obscurity. But if she'd learned bone magic from her mother, if she'd spent 40 years perfecting it, she'd be in her late 50s now. The right age for the handwriting, for the old knowledge. We need to find her, I said, before sunset on October 1st. That's less than 24 hours from now, Vogel replied. Thomas, maybe you should consider leaving the reservation until this is over. We can bring you back when we've caught her. If I leave, she wins. This is about proving she's more powerful than my grandfather's legacy. I won't give her that satisfaction. Ray, who'd been listening to the phone conversation, shook his head. You're stubborn, just like Walter. But Thomas, being brave and being stupid aren't the same thing. I know. But I also know that if the pattern holds, someone will die at sunset on October 1st. And if I run, it might be someone else, someone who doesn't know they're in danger. The next morning, September 30th, we organized a massive search. Every available officer, FBI agents, volunteers from the community. We spread out across the reservation, checking every remote area, every canyon, every power place that Henry Nez could identify. It was Ray who found the 4th pattern. He called it in around noon, his voice shaking. Thomas, You need to see this. It's different from the others." The pattern was in a box canyon on the west boundary, a place so remote it took us an hour to reach even with 4x4 vehicles. When we arrived, I understood why Ray had sounded shaken. The pattern wasn't just bones this time, it was a complete altar. Bones arranged in intricate designs, yes, but also offerings. Corn pollen, turquoise, feathers, sage. And in the center, not a skull, but something worse. A photograph of me, pinned to the ground with a bone needle through the heart. Around the photograph, written in what looked like ash or charcoal, was a message. Walter Begay thought he could stop the dark path. He couldn't. His grandson will prove it. When the sun sets today, the bones will call, and Thomas Begay will answer. This is my gift to Walter's memory. This is my revenge for what he took from me. Henry Nez read the message and his face went pale. This is personal. This is about your grandfather. What did he take from her? I thought about the journal entry. Her mother. My grandfather helped catch Adeline So, got her institutionalized. Irene must blame him for losing her mother. Then this isn't just about killing you, Henry said. This is about destroying Walter's legacy, proving that the dark path is stronger than the light. You're a symbol to her. Vogel was already coordinating a search pattern, trying to figure out where Irene might be based on the locations of the patterns. But I was looking at something else. The shadow of the canyon wall was creeping across the altar. As the sun moved across the sky, the shadow would eventually cover the photograph completely. And based on the angle, that would happen right around sunset. That's when it happens, I said. When the shadow covers my photograph. That's when the pattern activates, or completes, or whatever it does. Then we have until sunset, Vogel said, checking her watch. 6 hours. 6 hours to find a woman who'd spent 40 years learning how to kill with bones, who'd vanished from all official records, who was somewhere on this vast reservation preparing for my death. We split into teams, each taking a different area that Henry identified as a possible ceremonial site. I went with Ray and 2 FBI agents, heading toward Sleeping Ute Mountain, where the second pattern had been found. As we drove, Ray was quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. About your grandfather." "What about him?" "He didn't just help catch Adeline So. He performed a ceremony, a binding ceremony to break her connection to the bone magic. It worked, but it cost him. Medicine people who fight that kind of darkness, it takes something from them. Your grandfather was never the same after. He died young because of it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Why didn't anyone tell me? He made us promise not to. He didn't want you to feel guilty, to feel like his death was connected to his work. But Thomas, if Irene knows what your grandfather did, if she knows the ceremony he used, she might try to use it against you. The binding ceremony works both ways. It can break a connection, but it can also forge one. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe these patterns aren't just predictions. Maybe they're creating a connection between Irene and her victims. Maybe she's reaching through the bones, through the patterns, and pulling life out of people. And if that's true, then at sunset, when that shadow covers your photograph, she'll try to pull the life out of you. How do I stop it? You break the pattern. Destroy the altar before sunset, or ... quote. He hesitated. Or what? Or you face her directly. Turn the connection around. If she's reaching through the bones to you, then you can reach back to her. But that means opening yourself up to the same dark magic she's using. I thought about my grandfather, about the cost he'd paid for fighting darkness, about whether I was willing to pay the same price. The radio crackled. Vogel's voice urgent. All units, we've got something. The anthropologist identified the skull from Thomas's pattern. It's Ruth Begay, Walter Begay's sister, Thomas's great-aunt. She died in 1989, buried in the Navajo Nation cemetery. Someone dug up her grave. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ruth. I barely remembered her, but my grandfather had loved her. Using her skull, carving my name into it, that was the ultimate insult to his memory. That's how Irene got the skull, I said. She's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment. There's more, Vogel continued. We found records. Irene Etzo didn't just disappear. She changed her name, got a job, integrated into society. She's been living on the Ute Reservation for the past 20 years, working as a janitor at the Tribal Administration Building. The Tribal Administration Building, where I'd worked for 15 years. She'd been there the whole time, watching me, learning about me, waiting. What's her name now? I asked. Irene Chavez. Lives alone in a trailer on the east side of the reservation. We've got units heading there now. We turned around, racing toward the east side. The sun was lower now, maybe 3 hours from setting. Time was running out. When we arrived at the address, the trailer was empty, abandoned but recently. Dishes in the sink, bed unmade, but no Irene. Vogel's team searched it thoroughly. What they found was chilling. An entire room dedicated to bone magic. Shelves lined with bones of every kind. Journals filled with patterns, with notes on each victim. And on the wall, a map of the reservation with 4 locations marked. The 4 pattern sites. But there was a 5th mark, in the center of the other 4. The Chapel Mesa Overlook. A place where, according to the map's notation, all 4 directions met. Where the power was strongest. Where Irene would complete her revenge. We had 2 hours until sunset. We drove like demons toward Chapel Mesa, calling in every available unit. This would end today, one way or another. As we arrived at the overlook, I saw her. An elderly woman, maybe 60, standing at the edge of the mesa. In front of her was the largest bone pattern yet, a massive spiral that covered the entire clearing. And at its center, another altar. With my great-aunt's skull, my name carved into it, already covered halfway by the advancing shadow. Irene So turned to face us as we approached. Her face was calm, almost serene. Thomas Begay, she said. Walter's grandson. You're right on time. The bones said you would come. I stepped forward, hands visible, not threatening. Irene, this needs to stop. Whatever anger you have toward my grandfather, I'm not him. I didn't put your mother away. No, she agreed. But you carry his name. His blood, his legacy. And that legacy destroyed my family. My mother died in that institution, convinced she was powerless, convinced the bones had abandoned her. Your grandfather did that with his ceremony. He broke her. She killed 17 people, Irene. She had to be stopped. She was powerful. She understood the old ways, the real ways, not the sanitized versions the medicine people teach today, and your grandfather feared that power. So he destroyed it. The sun was touching the horizon now. Maybe 30 minutes of light left. You don't have to do this, I said. You can stop the pattern. Come with us, get help. She laughed. Stop? After 40 years of preparation, after learning everything my mother knew and more, I've studied bones in 6 states, Thomas. I've created 53 patterns. Only 3 have been public. The others. She smiled. Natural deaths. Heart attacks. Strokes. Accidents. No one ever connected them to me. 53 murders. She wasn't just continuing her mother's work. She'd surpassed it. When the sun sets, the pattern completes, Irene continued. Your life will flow into the bones, and the bones will remember. Just like they remember all the others, and your grandfather's legacy will die with you. The shadow was almost touching the skull now. I had a choice to make. Listen to Ray's advice and destroy the altar, breaking the pattern but letting Irene escape to create more patterns, kill more people. Or do what Henry Nez had suggested. Turn the connection around. Use the pattern against her. I thought about my grandfather, about the price he'd paid. And I made my decision. I stepped into the pattern. Ray shouted behind me, but I ignored him. I walked to the center, to the altar, and I placed my hands on my great-aunt's skull, and I opened myself to the bones. The world went white. The bones remembered. That was the first thing I understood when I touched my great-aunt's skull. The bones remembered everything, every life that had ended, every death that had been predicted, every moment between the pattern being created and the victim answering the call. I could feel them all, 53 deaths, stretching back over 40 years. Each one a thread in a massive web that Irene had been weaving, slowly, patiently, creating a network of death that extended across 6 states. And I could feel her too. On the other end of the connection, reaching through the bones toward me, trying to pull my life out like drawing water from a well. But my grandfather had taught me something, even if I hadn't understood it at the time. He'd taught me about balance, about how every force has a counterforce, every darkness has a light. Instead of fighting the pull, I pulled back. The sensation was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I could feel Irene's shock, her disbelief that I could resist, that I could turn her own magic against her. She'd spent 40 years perfecting this, but I had something she didn't. I had my grandfather's teaching, not the words he'd spoken, but the deeper lessons, the ones that lived in blood and bone and memory. Through the connection, I could see her life. See the little girl who'd watched her mother create bone patterns in secret, who'd been taught that the old ways were the real ways, that power mattered more than balance. I saw her mother being taken away, saw young Irene's rage and grief. But I also saw what came after, the decades of bitterness, of studying darker and darker practices, of learning to kill without remorse. I saw her victims, saw how she'd chosen them. Most weren't random. They were people she perceived as enemies of the old ways. Park rangers who restricted access to sacred sites, anthropologists who dug up ancient graves, government officials who enforced regulations on tribal lands. In her twisted logic, she was protecting native traditions, but she'd become the thing my grandfather had warned about. Someone who used power for harm instead of healing. "Stop!" Irene shouted, and I realized she could feel me too. Could feel me reading her through the bones. "Stop looking. Those memories are mine." "The bones remember everything," I said, and my voice sounded strange, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. "They remember your victims. They remember your mother. They remember the path you chose." The sun was setting behind the mesa now, the shadow covering the altar completely. This was the moment. The moment when the pattern should have killed me, when my life should have flowed into the bones. Instead, I felt something else, a presence familiar and warm. My grandfather. Not a ghost, not exactly, but an echo, a memory preserved in the bones of his sister. He was there, in the pattern, showing me what to do. I spoke words I didn't know I knew. Words in Old Navajo, in the language my grandfather had used for ceremonies. Words of binding, of breaking, of restoring balance. Irene screamed. She could feel what I was doing, feel her web of death unraveling. All those patterns, all those deaths, the connections she'd created over 40 years, they were breaking apart. No, you can't. You're not a medicine person. You're just a cop. I'm Walter Begay's grandson, I said, and he taught me more than I knew. The bone pattern beneath my feet began to glow, not with light exactly, but with something deeper. The bones were releasing the deaths they'd stored, the lives they'd held. I could feel the victims, feel them being freed from the web, and I could feel the cost. My grandfather had warned about this. Fighting darkness takes something from you. Every ceremony, every binding, every time you push back against the dark path, it leaves a mark. I felt it burning through me. Age, exhaustion. The years that should have been mine being consumed by the ceremony. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not when I was this close. Irene collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. The backlash of the breaking patterns was hitting her, all 53 deaths returning to their source. "You're killing me," she gasped, "just like your grandfather killed my mother." "I'm breaking the patterns," I corrected. "What happens to you after that is between you and the bones." The sun touched the horizon, true sunset, the moment of power. The bones exploded, not literally but spiritually, energetically. Every bone in the pattern shattered into dust, releasing everything they'd held. I was thrown backward, landing hard on the mesa top, gasping for air. When I could see again, Agent Vogel and Ray were beside me, helping me up. Around us, FBI agents were securing Irene, who lay unconscious on the ground. The pattern was gone, just dust and ash where the bones had been. "Thomas," Ray said, his voice shaking, "your hair, it's—" I touched my head. My hair, which had been black that morning, was now streaked with white. Premature aging, just like my grandfather had experienced. "It's the price," I said quietly. "The cost of fighting darkness." Henry Nez approached, his ancient face showing something like respect. "You did it. You broke the web. 53 deaths, all their connections severed. The victims can rest now." "What about her?" I looked at Irene, being loaded into an ambulance. "What happens to her?" "She'll be charged with multiple counts of murder," Vogel said. "We have the journals, the evidence in her trailer. Even if the bone magic angle doesn't hold up in court, we have enough physical evidence to convict. She confessed to 53 killings, Thomas. She's going away forever." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Irene had tapped into something real, something powerful. Prison couldn't contain that knowledge. And there were others like her out there, people who'd learned the dark path, who believed the bones could speak. Over the next few days, the investigation expanded. Vogel's team found evidence of 3 more people Irene had been teaching, sharing her mother's knowledge with a new generation. They were arrested, their patterns destroyed before they could hurt anyone. The human skulls were identified and returned to their families for proper burial. My great-aunt Ruth was reinterred in a private ceremony, with the medicine people performing rituals to cleanse her remains of the dark magic that had been worked on them. I spent 3 days in the hospital. The doctors couldn't explain my condition. Extreme exhaustion, premature aging, but no physiological cause they could identify. They wanted to keep me longer for observation, but I checked myself out. There was one more thing I needed to do. I drove to my grandfather's grave in a small cemetery on the Navajo reservation. I hadn't visited in years, too consumed with being a cop, with living in the modern world. I sat beside his headstone and told him everything. About the patterns, about Irene, about how I'd used his teaching to break the web of death. "You were right," I said. "The world is bigger than what we can see, and the bones do remember. I understand now why you spent your life fighting the dark path, why you paid the price you did. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and cedar, In that wind, I swear I heard his voice just for a moment. You did well, grandson. But remember, balance. Don't let the fight consume you like it consumed me. Live your life. Walk in beauty. I wiped my eyes and stood up. The white in my hair was permanent, the doctors had confirmed. A reminder of what I'd done, what I'd chosen, but also a reminder of my grandfather's legacy, which I was now part of. Back on the reservation, things slowly returned to normal. Ray partnered with me again, though he watched me carefully, making sure I wasn't pushing too hard, wasn't obsessing over the case. Agent Vogel stayed in touch, updating me on Irene's trial. She'd been deemed mentally competent to stand trial, despite her claims of bone magic and spiritual power. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The journals, the bones, the testimony of the families of victims who'd died under suspicious circumstances. She was convicted of 17 murders, the ones we could prove with forensic evidence. The other 36 remained officially unsolved, though we knew the truth. Irene Etso was sentenced to life without parole. She never showed remorse, never acknowledged that what she'd done was wrong. In her mind, she was a warrior fighting for the old ways, for native power and sovereignty. But she'd twisted that fight into something dark and destructive. And in the end, the bones had turned against her. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter. It was from Irene, sent from federal prison. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Thomas Begay, it read. You think you won. You think you broke the web, saved the day, honored your grandfather's memory. But you don't understand what you did. The bones remember. Always. And when you touched them, when you opened yourself to them, they remembered you too. You're marked now, just like I am, just like my mother was. The dark path doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. One day, you'll hear the bones calling, and when you do, you'll understand why my mother chose this path, why I chose it. Power like that doesn't let go. It waits. I burned the letter, but I couldn't burn the words from my mind. Because she was right about one thing. I was marked. The bones had touched me, shown me their secrets, their memories. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind blew across the reservation, I swear I could hear them, whispering, calling, remembering. I told Henry Nez about the letter, about my fears. He performed a protection ceremony, traditional practices meant to shield me from dark influences. It helped, but it didn't erase the knowledge I now carried. You walked the line, Henry told me, between light and dark, between the modern world and the old ways. Your grandfather walked that line his whole life. Now you do too. But Thomas, remember, you chose the light. The bones called and you answered, but you answered on your own terms. That matters. I wanted to believe him, most days I did, but I also knew that Irene's network had extended far beyond what we'd uncovered. 3 students arrested, but how many others had she taught over 40 years? How many people out there knew how to create bone patterns, how to predict or cause death through ancient magic? I became obsessed with the question. Started investigating cold cases across the Southwest, looking for patterns that might indicate bone magic at work. Ray warned me I was going down the same path my grandfather had, consuming myself with fighting darkness. He was probably right. But I couldn't stop, because I'd seen what I'd seen, felt what I'd felt. I knew the bones were real, their power was real, and somewhere out there people were using that power to harm others. 6 months after Irene's conviction, I found another pattern. It was in New Mexico, on Navajo land, 300 miles from the Ute Reservation. Not my jurisdiction, but I drove down anyway when the Navajo Police contacted me for consultation. The pattern was crude, nowhere near Irene's skill level. but it was there, bones arranged in a circle, marking someone for death. "We found it 3 days ago," the Navajo officer told me. "Yesterday, the person marked in the pattern died. Heart attack. Natural causes officially." "It's not natural," I said, "and it won't be the last. Whoever made this is learning, practicing. They're going to get better." I helped them investigate, spent 2 weeks on Navajo land tracking down the practitioner. We found her, eventually, a young woman, barely 25, who'd learned bone magic from her grandmother. She'd only created 3 patterns, was still figuring out how it worked. We stopped her before she could do more damage, but it confirmed what I feared. Irene's mother hadn't been the first, and Irene wouldn't be the last. The knowledge was out there, being passed down, learned, used, and I was one of the few people who knew how to stop it. Ray pulled me aside after that case. "Thomas, you need to let this go. You're turning into your grandfather, spending your whole life fighting shadows. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. Someone has to do this. Not you. Not alone. You're burning out, aging before your time. Look at yourself." I looked in the mirror later that night. Ray was right. The white in my hair had spread, and there were lines on my face that hadn't been there 6 months ago. The cost of fighting darkness was accumulating, just like it had for my grandfather. But I couldn't stop, because every time I tried, I heard the bones calling, and I knew that somewhere, someone was creating new patterns, marking new victims, walking the dark path, and the bones would always remember. 5 years after I broke Irene's web of death, I stood at the edge of another bone pattern, staring at what I knew would be my last case. I was 42 years old, but looked 60. My hair was completely white now, my face lined with premature wrinkles, my hands showing the tremor of someone twice my age. The cost of fighting bone magic had accumulated faster than I'd anticipated. The doctors said I had maybe 5 years left, maybe less. My body was paying the price for every pattern I'd broken, every dark ceremony I'd stopped. I'd investigated 37 cases in those 5 years, stopped 23 practitioners, destroyed countless patterns, saved dozens of lives. But each one took something from me. Each one aged me, wore me down, brought me closer to the end. Ray had retired 2 years ago, begging me to do the same. "You've done enough," he'd said. "More than enough. Let someone else carry this burden." But there was no one else. Henry Nez had died 3 years back, taking his knowledge with him. The younger medicine people didn't want to deal with the dark path, understandably, and law enforcement still didn't know how to handle cases that involved bone magic, spiritual practices, things that couldn't be explained in official reports. So I continued alone, consulting for tribal police across the Southwest, tracking patterns, stopping practitioners before they could harm anyone. And now I was staring at a pattern that had my name on it, not carved into a skull this time, written in bone dust, arranged in the shape of letters. Thomas Begay, right in the center of a spiral pattern that stretched 30 feet across. I'd found it on the Utah side of the Navajo reservation, in a remote canyon that required 3 hours of hiking to reach. Someone had left me a map, slipped under my door at the hotel in Blanding where I'd been staying. No note, just the map with an X marking this location. I'd known it was a trap, but I'd come anyway, because I recognized the pattern style. It was Irene's. Irene Tso had died in federal prison 6 months ago. Natural causes, officially. Heart failure. She was 62 years old, had served less than 5 years of her sentence, but I'd suspected immediately that she'd created one final pattern before she died. One last gift to the student who'd studied her techniques most thoroughly, me. "I know you're watching," I called out to the canyon walls. "I know you're here. Show yourself." For a long moment there was only silence and the wind whistling through the red rock formations. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slowly. A young woman stood 20 feet away, maybe 30 years old, with traditional Navajo features and eyes that held both intelligence and something darker. She wore modern clothes, hiking gear, but around her neck hung a necklace made of small bones. "Officer Begay," she said, "or should I say Thomas? We're beyond formalities now. Who are you?" "My name is Dana So." Irene was my grandmother. Adeline was my great-grandmother. The dark path runs in my family, and I'm the one who'll perfect it. My hand moved toward my weapon, but she held up a hand. "Don't. You're not here to arrest me. You're here because I called you, because I wanted to talk to the man who broke my grandmother's web, who fought the darkness and survived. Well, survived so far. What do you want?" "I want to offer you a choice. The same choice my grandmother should have offered you 5 years ago, before you destroyed everything she'd built." Dana stepped closer to the pattern. "You've been fighting bone magic for 5 years, fighting darkness. But you've never asked the real question. Why fight it? Because it kills people. Because it's wrong. Is it? My great-grandmother used bone magic to protect our people, to strike back at those who oppressed us. My grandmother continued that work. And I will too. But Thomas, you could help. You understand the bones now. You've touched them, spoken to them. You know their power. I know their cost. Yes, the cost." She gestured at me, at my prematurely aged body. "You're dying, Thomas. The fight has consumed you, just like it consumed your grandfather. You have maybe 5 years left, maybe less. Is that worth it? All this suffering, all this sacrifice, for what? To delay the inevitable? To pretend the old ways are dead when they're not?" I looked at the pattern beneath my feet, at my name written in bone dust. "You're offering me a way out. I'm offering you power. Join me. Stop fighting the darkness and embrace it. Learn what my grandmother knew, what my great-grandmother knew. Use bone magic not to kill, but to protect. To live longer. To be stronger. You could have decades instead of years, Thomas. You could walk in power instead of slowly dying." It was tempting, more tempting than I wanted to admit. I was tired, so tired. 5 years of fighting, of aging, of watching myself deteriorate. 5 years of being alone, of carrying knowledge that isolated me from everyone I cared about. "Think about it," Dana continued. "Your grandfather fought darkness his whole life. Did it make him happy? Did it give him peace? Number. He died young, worn out, forgotten by everyone except his family. And you're following the same path, dying for people who don't even know you're protecting them." She was right about that. Most people would never know about the patterns I'd stopped, the lives I'd saved. My work was invisible, undocumented, unrecognized, but I thought about my grandfather's last words, the ones I'd heard in the wind at his grave. Walk in beauty. Don't let the fight consume you. I'd failed at that. I'd let the fight consume me completely, but that didn't mean I regretted it. "You said your grandmother should have offered me a choice," I said. "But she didn't because she knew what I'd choose. She knew I'd never join the dark path, no matter what it cost me." Dana's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool. Just like your grandfather. Maybe. But I'm a fool who stopped 37 practitioners in 5 years, saved dozens of lives, broken webs of death that stretched across generations. If that makes me a fool, I'm okay with that." Even if it kills you? We all die, Dana. The question is what we do with the time we have. I chose to spend mine fighting people like you. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I thought you'd say that. My grandmother said you would too. That's why she prepared this pattern. Not to kill you quickly, like the others, but to give you a choice. Join us, or die slowly as the pattern consumes you over the next year. Every day, a little more life draining away until there's nothing left. A year is more than some people get. It's less than you deserve. Maybe. But it's enough time to stop you. Dana laughed. Stop me? Thomas, you're standing in the pattern. You activated it the moment you stepped into the center. My grandmother spent her last weeks in prison perfecting this design. It's already working on you. Can't you feel it? I could, a coldness spreading from my feet upward, the bones calling to the bones inside my body. The pattern was alive, active, drawing life from me with each passing second. But I'd learned something in 5 years of fighting bone magic. I'd learned that patterns could be broken, not from the outside, but from the inside, by someone willing to pay the cost. You're right, I told Dana. The pattern is working. I can feel it, but you made one mistake. What's that? You assumed I came here to survive. I knelt down and placed my hands directly on the bone dust that spelled my name. And I did what I'd done 5 years ago on that mesa with Irene's pattern. I opened myself completely to the bones. The world went white again. But this time, instead of fighting the connection, I embraced it. Let the pattern pull life from me, let it consume me. But as it did, I channeled everything I'd learned, everything my grandfather had taught me, every ceremony I'd witnessed and performed. I spoke the words of breaking, of binding, of severing dark connections. And I poured my life force into those words, fueling them with everything I had left. Dana screamed. She could feel what I was doing, feel her pattern turning against itself, consuming its own power. The bone dust beneath my hands began to glow, then burn, then disintegrate. No, stop, you're destroying it. That's the point. The pattern collapsed, not just this one, but something bigger. Through the bones, I could feel other patterns Dana had created, other victims she'd marked, 6 of them scattered across the Southwest, all connected through her grandmother's teachings. And I broke them all. The cost was immediate and total. I felt my life draining away, felt years being consumed in seconds. My vision blurred, my heart struggled, my lungs couldn't pull in enough air. But I didn't stop. Not until every single pattern was destroyed, every connection severed, every victim freed. Dana collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. The backlash was hitting her the same way it had hit Irene 5 years ago. You killed yourself, she gasped. For what? 6 people you don't even know? 7, counting myself, I corrected, my voice barely a whisper. 7 people who won't die because of bone magic. 7 patterns broken. The web ends here, Dana, with you. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called the Navajo Police, gave them my location, told them about Dana. Then I lay back on the red sand and stared up at the canyon walls, at the blue sky beyond. I'd done it, finished the work my grandfather had started. The Tso family line of bone magic was broken. Dana would go to prison, just like her grandmother. And without Irene to teach her, without the accumulated knowledge of 3 generations, she'd never perfect the art. The dark path ended today. As my vision faded, I heard sirens in the distance. Help coming, but too late for me. I'd known it would be. The pattern had taken too much, and breaking it had taken the rest. But I wasn't afraid. I was at peace. Because I'd walked in beauty, in my own way. Not the way my grandfather had wanted, not with balance and moderation, but with everything I had, holding nothing back, fighting darkness until there was nothing left to give. The sirens got louder, voices calling my name, footsteps running. Too late, I thought. But that's okay. And then I felt it. A warmth spreading through me, starting where my hands touched the bone dust. Not the cold of death, but something else, something unexpected. The bones were giving back. All the lives I'd saved over 5 years, all the patterns I'd broken, all the victims I'd freed, they'd left echoes in the bones. Echoes of gratitude, of life, of light. And those echoes were flowing into me now, filling the emptiness the pattern had created. I wasn't healing exactly, the damage was too extensive for that. But I wasn't dying either. I was suspended, held in balance between life and death, sustained by the accumulated good I'd done. When I opened my eyes, I saw faces above me. Navajo police officers, paramedics, and standing at the edge of the broken pattern, Henry Nez. But that was impossible. Henry had died 3 years ago. Not dead, Thomas, Henry said, reading my expression. Just waiting for the moment when you'd need me most. I don't understand. The bones remember. You said that yourself. They remember darkness, yes, but they also remember light. They remember every life saved, every pattern broken, every time someone chose the good path over the dark. Your grandfather taught me that before he died. And now the bones are teaching you. Am I dying? We're all dying, from the moment we're born. But you have time yet. Not years, maybe, but enough. Enough to finish your work. The paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, started treatment. I heard them talking about my vitals, about how I shouldn't be alive, about how my body was shutting down but somehow still functioning. Dana Tso was arrested, taken into custody. As they led her past me, she looked down with something like respect. You won, she said. My grandmother was right. You're stronger than she thought. Stronger than any of us. Not stronger, I replied, just more stubborn. She almost smiled, maybe. But Thomas, you should know, the dark path doesn't end with me. There are others. Other families, other practitioners. You can't stop them all. I know, but I can stop as many as I can for as long as I can. They took her away, and I was loaded into the ambulance. The ride to the hospital was long, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. But each time I woke, I felt the bones' gift sustaining me, keeping me alive through sheer force of accumulated goodness. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. The doctors were baffled by my condition, by the fact that I was alive at all. They couldn't explain my recovery, such as it was. I would never be healthy again, never regain what the years of fighting bone magic had taken. But I would live. For a while longer. Long enough. Dana Tso was charged with attempted murder, among other crimes. Like her grandmother, she refused to show remorse, insisted she'd been protecting native traditions, fighting back against oppression. The jury didn't buy it. She was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. I testified at her trial, told the court about the pattern, about the Tso family's history of bone magic. The defense tried to paint me as delusional, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. The bones, the journals, the victims who'd died under suspicious circumstances. Justice was served. Again. After the trial, I retired from law enforcement. Really retired this time. My body couldn't handle the work anymore, and I'd done what I needed to do. The Tso line was broken, the web was destroyed. I moved to a small house on the edge of the Navajo reservation. in sight of the mesas my grandfather had loved. I spent my days reading his journals, learning the ceremonies he'd known, trying to understand the balance he'd always talked about. I'd spent 5 years fighting darkness. Now I had however long was left to learn to walk in beauty. Young officers came to me sometimes, asking about bone magic, about cases that didn't make sense. I helped when I could, shared what I'd learned, tried to pass on the knowledge before it was lost. But I didn't investigate anymore, didn't hunt practitioners. That work was for someone younger, someone who still had decades ahead of them. 1 year after my retirement, on the anniversary of my confrontation with Dana, I drove out to the canyon where I'd broken the final pattern. The bone dust was long gone, blown away by wind and rain, but the power of the place remained. I stood in the center of where the pattern had been and spoke aloud to anyone who might be listening. My name is Thomas Begay. I'm the grandson of Walter Begay, medicine man. I'm 43 years old, and I look 70. I've fought bone magic for 6 years, broken hundreds of patterns, stopped dozens of practitioners. I've sacrificed my health, my youth, my life for this work, and I do it again. Because the bones remember. They remember the darkness, yes, but they also remember the light. They remember every life saved, every pattern broken, every moment when someone chose good over evil. I'm living proof of that. The bones gave back what I'd given. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to show me that fighting darkness is worth the cost. So, to anyone listening, anyone who might walk the dark path, anyone who thinks bone magic is just about power and revenge, the bones remember everything. And eventually, they turn against those who use them for harm. Choose carefully. Because the path you walk creates the world you'll live in. I stood there until sunset, watching the light fade across the red rocks, feeling the presence of my grandfather in the wind, in the land, in the bones beneath my feet. Then I drove home, to my small house, to the life I had left. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I became a cop, but it was a good life, a meaningful life. I'd fought darkness and survived. Not unscathed, but intact. Not whole, but complete. And when my time came, when the bones finally called me home, I'd go knowing I'd done what I could. Saved who I could. Fought as long as I could. The bones would remember, and that was enough. Thomas Begay died on a spring morning 3 years later, at age 46. He was found in his garden, tending the plants he'd grown from his grandfather's seeds. He passed peacefully, with no signs of pain or struggle. At his funeral, officers from 6 tribal police departments attended, along with dozens of FBI agents who'd worked with him over the years. Most didn't know the full extent of his work, the patterns he'd broken, the darkness he'd fought. But they knew he'd been one of the good ones, one of the best. Henry Nez, who'd somehow attended despite being dead for 5 years, spoke at the service. Thomas Begay walked a hard path. He fought darkness until it consumed him, then fought some more. He paid the price his grandfather paid, and he did it willingly. The bones remember him. The land remembers him, and we will remember him. As someone who chose light over darkness, service over safety, sacrifice over survival. He walked in beauty, in his own way. And that is all any of us can do. They buried Thomas next to his grandfather, in the small cemetery under the mesa. And at his grave, they placed a medicine bundle containing something unusual, a single white bone, perfectly preserved, that glowed faintly in the moonlight. A gift from the bones themselves. A final thank you to the man who'd spent his life breaking their dark patterns and teaching them to remember the light. The bone collector had collected one last time, not death, but peace, not darkness, but rest. And in the red earth of the reservation, beneath the endless sky, Thomas Begay finally found the balance his grandfather had always wanted for him.